We're all about programming this week in the Outhaus, and we've got a couple of people who I've invited specifically to the Outhaus, and they are going to hopefully talk about some programming that they've run recently, and in a, I guess, post-pandemic world, and how that programming went, and perhaps some learnings that they had from that programming. And then, as always, we're going to just have a bit of a chat about programming and in all its forms in outdoor environmental education and how it's going to look both now and in the future. Without any further ado, just before I start, I would like to recognize the Indigenous custodianships of the land in which we work and play, and we would like to remind our participants of our role as educators in bringing meaningful discourse around the issues of Indigenous connection to land and reconciliation. Secondly, I'd like to give thanks to the Outhaus oligarchs, or the management team, Cherie, David, Ellen, and Henry, for all their tireless work, particularly in the last couple of weeks as we've launched our website. Very exciting. InsideTheOuthaus.org, if you don't know where that is. And I encourage you to check it out. There's a lot of great resources there, which we're sharing, and also recorded conversations that we've had for the past 17 weeks. So without any further ado, let's get into a bit of a conversation around outdoor programming and what it means, and perhaps what people have learnt running programming in this world where we're dealing with time after the COVID pandemic. I guess I'll pose a probing question to the room. In a pre-COVID world, what are the major changes that people who have actually been running programming have noticed in programming in what has been an after the pandemic world? If people could comment on that who have perhaps run programs in that time, that would be lovely. Thank you.
G'day, Pete. Hello, everyone. I guess I'm coming from a university perspective, and what we've found, things have shifted significantly for us in terms of our programming and our planning. I guess things that of a more general nature in terms of logistics has been just the level of interaction required from their land managers and the responses with them and the engagement with them. You know, previously they certainly wanted to know where we were going and what we were doing, and there was certainly a level of risk management associated to that. But now there's another layer, and even a sense of, do we really want you here type scenario. So we've had one major expedition where we've shifted it from places such as Kagari or Fraser Island to Bribie Island, and then we ended up at another third alternate location. And a lot of that was to do with working with land managers as a sort of primary scenario. That meant quite a lot of rehashing of risk management, but also just relationship building was probably one of our big things, and re-establishing that, because a lot of the people in those positions were really quite concerned about what they would be held responsible for in terms of COVID, and then how we were managing to meet those. Other areas, it's actually, in some ways, has thrown up a really interesting scenario for us to really refocus in on our local boundaries, our local areas. Previously, we were doing quite a lot of logistics to take our students to far off places, but it's really meant a refocusing on what can we do close to home. And if anything, that has brought about some really innovative ways of doing our programming. It's actually brought about some new and interesting places that we can visit. And it probably, if anything, speaks more to why we focus on place-based education and not so much, you know, adventures and far off places. So that's been a really interesting outcome for us. I guess as two main starting points. Probably as our third starting point, it's actually increased our time in the field. When we've been able to run programs, we're now, and it's probably very different for schools and very different for other program providers, but for us, we used to do all our logistics based on students meeting us at the university and then transporting them somewhere. Now we meet them on site, and that actually has increased our time in activity, for want of a better word, time in activity, where because we're meeting them on site, they're not wasting that 2 to 3 hours of logistics, moving, packing up gear and getting to the site and even just waiting for people. We're actually meeting them there on site at 8 o'clock and they're in their boats or they're on their bikes or they're climbing within an hour, versus sort of the 2 to 3 hours of sort of downtime leaving the site and getting there. And it also means that at the end of that program, the programs have been able to extend out so that we can actually use all of the day versus racing to sort of get people back to buses or getting them back to, you know, a 3 hour drive home, that sort of thing. So, so they've been really positive sort of outcomes. How's that for a starting point, Pete? What do you think?
So thanks for that, Munge. That was great. I'd just like to welcome Andrew Grant from QCCC into the room. Andrew also has been running some programming in recent weeks in a totally different setting. And so maybe you could make some opening comments on some learnings that you've had from programming that you've run here in this time. Andrew, thanks.
Yeah, g'day everyone. So I'm up at QCCC Mapleton, and we've got other sites at Brookfield and Tamborine and Noosa. So yeah, we're sort of in what, week 5 of term 3 already. So we have had schools since week 1 of term 3, but more centre-based programming. So obviously Queensland has the industry plans. We sat down with the industry plans and had to go through it, really look at what we thought was achievable and what wasn't achievable in terms of some of the activities we run. So we did decommission several activities for the moment, that particularly being climbing wall, abseiling. And those ones really, I know other sites are running them, so we'll probably revisit that in term 4, but we just thought, you know, with, you know, community concern and that sort of thing, that it was just easier not to have those, particularly climbing wall with the multiple handholds and all that sort of thing. The other quirk of our industry plan is that we have to run with a zone system to keep groups apart. So we generally have multiple groups on site. So our site has now been carved up into, well, 6 individual zones, which we use. But that's meant some activities like orienteering can't really go ahead because the intent of the zone system is to keep groups apart. I think the actual terminology is there must be no intermingling. So obviously activities where the kids are running pretty much free range around, I mean, we've got 55 acres up here, but yeah, just having them run free range, it's just impossible to guarantee that there won't be intermingling. So those have been the kind of activities that we've just decommissioned for the time being. Everything else, I mean, probably everyone has found this, like the manufacturer's instructions in terms of cleaning and hygiene and all that sort of thing. A lot of them were quite contradictory. So the manufacturers all seem to have different standards. So we've kind of, I mean, really to summarize for us, it's really, you know, we want participants to be sanitizing before they touch something and once they come off that. So, you know, keep it simple. But really that's one of the main things, is sanitize before you touch and sanitize after as well. And that's managed to sort of cover off a lot of the activities we've run. And then it did, because we were decommissioning some, it did mean that we looked at implementing a few new activities. So probably the main one that we're running with is we bought a fleet of scooters, which are running around the Mapleton paths at the moment. If anyone knows Mapleton, it's got sort of grandstand view of the Sunshine Coast. And from up here, you can see like the coast, you can see the hinterland, and some of the Dreamtime stories as well. So You know, we've got Tribal Link, which is an Aboriginal cultural activity centre on site. So yeah, we're able to sort of do a bit of a kind of urban tour of Mapleton for what it is, which the only traffic jam we have here is when the ducks cross the road. But and then yeah, incorporate some of those Dreamtime stories. So yeah, that's some of the changes for us and some of the things that we're doing.
Thanks for that insight, Andrew. Have other people in the room been running programs? Have they been working on programs? Do other people have comments on what has perhaps been said?
I think, Pete, I'll just add, well, to save the silence. One of the other things that we found that was quite from the two things, logistics perspective, because we're all camping in single tents, that creates a different dilemma in terms of location access. National parks here in Queensland, I should say, I'm working at the University of the Sunshine Coast, and national parks are still booking campsites as if you're camping 2 to a tent and 3 to a tent and those sort of things. So some of the smaller campsites are getting very well, you know, oversupplied in that sense. And that creates a little bit of frustration working with other land users and other people. That was probably one of the things that was sort of quite apparent as you walk into a campsite and suddenly you're there with quite a few other people. There was a bit of, I guess, management, having to have a chat and having to have a conversation with other people and making sure that they felt comfortable with a group of students being in that location, and how us as an organisation were going to manage to make sure that we weren't going to cause them concern, and being really overt in our sort of practices towards managing sanitary and managing hygiene and those sort of things were quite evident. And some people were a bit reactionary to us, like, well, you cannot be here. How can you possibly have 8 boys with you and all those sort of things? So it did take a bit of work in that sense. I guess that enabled some realities though for a lot of students who have never camped, kind of even in a small solo scenario where they're camped by themselves in a small campsite away from the rest of the group. So that sort of created some other sort of conversations that we wouldn't normally have. And I guess probably one of the other large things that sort of was a little bit detrimental, sort of that growing sort of group sort of process that occurs on a lot of trips, was the cooking scenario, and having to have solo cooking and having to have people often preparing meals that were probably just because of either logistics, we've been only having a few transiers and those sort of things, you know, ready-made meals, pouring in sort of hot water into backcountry and so forth. And that took a bit of work to recreate that sense of what that evening time or that morning time was like in terms of that shared sort of experience. But I think a little bit of clever sort of facilitation can overcome that. Not from me.
Brandon, how will that play, given that you're training future outdoor leaders, in terms of them having to, obviously it's just crystal balling about what the future is going to look like as far as programming, but I guess that's why we're talking about it today. If they're preparing meals that are, you know, add water and away they go, how will that sort of transfer to the skills that they need to have when they have to go out and teach 13-year-olds how to cook on transiers in a year or two's time, when we might be back in programming?
It's an interesting dilemma because, like I guess in my circumstance, I don't get a lot of time with students. I don't get a lot of time sort of replicating these experiences. So I will, you know, role model. I try and take meals and role model and show them. We have those discussions around that. And we're in their logistics and planning. They have to submit meals that wouldn't just be a quick cook. They have to think about what that would look like. But it's probably one that in the fullness of time, we'll see what comes of it really. Other than those sort of bit of role modeling of, well, here's a meal that I would prepare that is a single cook meal and there's some preparation involved, other than just boiling water and tipping it into a fairly expensive bag and shaking, so to speak. But I think it's going to be an interesting one. I know, talking to some providers in Western Australia, they've had students, and I'd be interested to hear what some school representatives of others have to say. We're still at a point where we're solo tenting, and I'm not too sure when we'll go back to a shared tenting scenario. And that sort of creates, from a logistics perspective, you know, resourcing and you know, having enough tents, and then also the transfer and changeover of all that sort of equipment is a fairly big scenario. Here at the uni, we're having to find extra space for the washing of equipment and those sort of things because of the amount of trips going out. That's been quite a large sort of area of change, the washing and the transfer of equipment and the space available for that. So, and we haven't got it right yet. We're still working through it.
Andrew Grant or anyone else in the room, has anyone else had experience with students in tents? And if so, could we maybe have some people comment on what they've found and, you know, how have they been managing students in tents? I know last week when we were talking freelancers, Jared from Churchy had a few comments about changes in programming. So.
We haven't yet. We've got one coming up in a couple of weeks' time. And I mean, my understanding of the industry plan, correct me if I'm wrong, with the school-age students and, you know, the interesting conversations we've had about relaxation, 4 meters squared, but, you know, the new terminology there is the top to tail. So my understanding is 2 to a tent. But yeah, obviously that top to tail approach to keep the 1.5 meter separation. But yeah, I mean, similar for us, like we will have to go out and get some more tents and that sort of thing. Because our sort of presumption is we're probably going to be living with this new way of doing things for at least 18 months is what we're thinking. And even that might be optimistic. So, you know, if some of our larger expeditions go ahead, and we've also, like we're doing tent camping at Noosa, if some of that is going to go ahead, we're going to need more equipment. Same as USC, I guess. I know Cricket had a lot to do with the industry plans. He might correct me there.
Thanks for that, Andrew. Welcome to the room, David Gamble from Brighton Grammar. Like to have your perspective on programming, although I'm sure it's probably at this point in time, unfortunately, a bit limited in Victoria where you are. But have you got things in place, and what are you learning in terms of how programming is going to go forward, Dave?
Yeah, thanks, Pete. Sorry for the late arrival. So I'm not sure what you've been discussed prior to, but yeah, in Victoria, it's been a sort of endless cycle of planning and cancelling, especially for, you know, private schools and my school in particular. So we've planned. I've done lots of planning in terms of, all right, when we come back, what are we going to do? How are we going to do it? Distancing, physical distancing with students, increased hygiene, all that kind of stuff. Put all those things in place in terms of risk management, and then just gone into lockdown again or canceled it. So we're, you know, and then you kind of look at it and you go, well, now the school calendars are even more compressed. So we're looking at what we tried to do as a school, whole school, in term 3 and term 4, now all being compressed into term 4. So you've got so many conflicting kind of resources as a school. So your sport commitments, are those all going to be compressed into term 4? You've got your music and your drama commitments, are those going to be compressed into term 4? Well, where does outdoor ed fit in the bigger, you know, picture of it all, and how do we make that work? So yeah, endless meetings and conversations with executive about where the priorities lie. And, you know, just as the years gone by, we've just, for me in my school anyway, we've flicked off year levels. So we've gone, yeah, year 8's a real priority. Well, you know what? Getting into August, September, year 8's not a priority anymore. So that gets canceled. Year 7, that's still a priority. Okay, we want to keep running year 7 stuff. So how do we do that? But, you know, to be honest, again, by the time we come out of hard lockdown at the end of this term, and we're looking at sort of level 3 restrictions into term 4, likely, year 7's is probably going to get flicked, you know, for something else. So it's been pretty difficult, but I've got an amazing team of 3, and I kind of say to them, we just need to be ready to hit the go button when we're allowed to. So I know it's disheartening to plan and replan and rephrase and risk manage and cut things from 5 days to 2.5 to 1 day to online. But, you know, until you're given the go ahead, you just want to be ready to go tomorrow if you can. So that's kind of from us, but I don't know, like, I don't know about you guys and what states you're in, but if you're in Queensland, like, are you looking at using more buses? Are you looking at hiring neighboring centers so that you can spread students around? Because that's the stuff that we've been chatting about down here in Victoria. Like, how do we actually get students off campus and out of the cities, even to hardtop facilities? Do we have to hire now 2 facilities instead of just 1 to split the students up? So I'm pretty interested to know how you guys are handling it, because you've got more freedoms than we do, but still at the same time, probably the same risk and logistical issues that we're going to face.
So we heard from Brendan Munge from USC, and he made some comments that students are now, at least in the university setting at his university, self-driving to programs. Andrew, can you maybe answer Dave's question a bit around how people are at least being transported to programs at QCCC, please?
The Queensland government advice with school-based transport is that, again, social distancing is not as in, well, I don't know what the exact terminology they're using, but, you know, because they haven't put extra buses on to get kids to school. So there is a line in the advice to schools along the lines of school-age children, normal kind of busing arrangements. But some schools are kind of splitting their kids up into more buses, and some of the bus companies who are really keen for work are basically offering 2 buses for the price of 1 as well. But I mean, our context, we don't actually arrange the transport, so it's been very much left up to the schools. And like often, different schools have different ways of doing things. So yeah, sometimes they're coming with extra buses, and sometimes they're not. So we're recommending that they stagger the arrivals so we can get 1 bus load in, kind of get them away from the bus area and out of there before the next bus comes in, because as soon as they get off the bus, it's just like a riot. So yeah, that's our recommendation. That's how we're trying to do things, is just bring the buses in 1 by 1 so that we can manage that process of getting them to their rooms. And again, like I said earlier, the Queensland Industry Plan for outdoor education does have a relaxation of the 4 metre squared rule for school-age students. So yeah, that I think we're the only industry plan with that. So there's a couple of trade-offs on that. Like, we're not allowed to have a group above the size of 100. But yeah, you know, it's all, we know we're fortunate in Queensland because there's no community transmission. And I think if community transmission starts, a lot of that stuff will get clamped on very quickly. So.
I'll just jump in, Pete. I know Mark's guys could probably pipe up and promote this as well, because it's a Corf initiative. I believe there's a discussion group happening Wednesday, midday, I think, about the limit in the COVID safe plan, at least for those organisations in Queensland. But it might be relevant to Dave and other people in other parts of the country who are looking to get their plans, specifically in different states, expanded so they can accommodate bigger groups. Mark, is that link correct?
Yeah, that's right. It's the 19th of August, not this coming Wednesday. I'll post a link to it in any moment, so you can register that way if you want to attend. I did recommend those organisations like QCCC, Andrew, and USC to come along and discuss what we might be able to do to get ready for the eventual shift to bigger numbers.
Oh, we'll be there. Don't worry.
Excellent, good man.
There's a few people from WA in the room. In terms of programming in WA, has programming gone ahead? Is there programming going on? Can people maybe shed some light on what's happening in the West reprogramming?
I'm in WA, and I've got one program coming up at the end of this month, but it's only a small group. There's only 12 students, and the school, over here, the school's really happy for them to still be sharing a tent, but adults are obviously not sharing a tent. And I'm pretty sure Outdoor Discoveries just ran 2 weeks up in Kalbarri, but again, they were kind of supplying staff, but the school was doing all the gear side of it. So they didn't, I guess, make those calls. The school made the calls on those things. But my understanding, they might have been in Hoochies, to be honest. I'm not sure. But my understanding is programs are happening over here. And it feels like I've definitely come up with a risk management plan, but I feel like everybody else is a bit like back to normal, but I haven't worked for anybody else. That's what I've observed.
Thanks, Josh. That's really interesting. Welcome to the Outhaus once again. Great to have you here. Does anyone else, Trevor, are you running anything in WA where you could kind of give a bit of a comment on programming? Sorry to put you on the hot seat.
No, I've just set my meal aside there, so I won't project any crunching or munching noises. Because I work in the public sector, and I haven't done any programs that have returned back to schools. We've done some train the trainer type stuff, so we can bring more skills on into the instructor base. But starting this week, certainly from my point of view, we're back in the residential camps with Department of Sport and Recreation. Because I haven't physically given one of these yet, but I will do this week. From my understanding is the dormitory spacing had some concerns, but they seem to have resolved that, and the schools appear to be okay to return to a sort of normal type stuff. As I say, I haven't done one on the ground, so I'm speaking a little bit out of turn, and I don't want to completely speak for DSR, but my understanding is it's on Thursday I'll be doing a raft building activity with kids at Woodman Point, and my expectation is it's going to be business as usual. You know, groups of 6, same size of groups. It's all very much outdoor. Even the indoor stuff like team building, my understanding is the instructors give themselves some distance, and there's a lot more cleaning going on and a lot more care taken with equipment and stuff, but pretty much the kids are all over each other. So if we want to do a crowded team activity, we're going to go for it.
Very interesting comments. Thanks, Trevor. I'd like to just throw it open to people. Running raft building whilst being socially distant would be quite interesting.
Well, I'll be in a Corsica, so a sit-in kayak on the water. So I'd only go close enough to splash the participants on the raft, but the kids will have 6 or 8, probably about 7 or 8 packed onto the raft. Yeah, they won't be 1.5 meters apart even when they fall into the water. So.
But minors don't have to be socially distanced under guidelines. So it's only them from adults or adults from adults.
Yep. So as I say, I'll keep my distance, and I think, I mean, from a practical point of view, I used to try and get my programs moving faster with things like getting the PFDs on the kids. In other words, show them how to do it, but then get with the kids and actually get them rigged up as quickly as possible so we can get down to the beach. I think now I'll be standing back and say, right, guys, over to you. And if I watch them stumble and fumble and stuff like that, okay, it'll take an extra 5 minutes or 10 minutes, but I'll be keeping my distance.
Yeah, I think, again, different context. We're right in the thick of it here in Victoria, but my brain's going to almost isolating groups as a single unit, and trying to keep the adults as much part of that unit as possible. So their two guides or their teacher and their two group leaders, whatever activity we run, those group leaders are going to have to be able to run those activities. And then support just goes around like a cleaning unit, which it just kills my budget, you know, in terms of a practical sense, but in terms of like COVID safe and just limiting interactions between adults and adults between groups. I kind of, my brain's kind of going to sort of, let's keep that group of 10 to 14 kids or 10 to 12 kids and 2 to 3 adults just completely isolated from everyone else. Try and operate like that.
We're playing the same thing, David.
Yeah,
we're playing the same thing. So therefore, like if anything would have happened, then it doesn't affect our programs the following week. So we can contain it like within our own staffing pool in a minor scale, that those staff don't come into contact with other staff on program. So therefore, if there is any contraction, therefore it doesn't affect our other clients out there as well, and anyone else in the staffing pool, and changing our whole business procedures to, like, we usually have a pack down procedure back at our factory. It's just going to be a drop and go, and have full teams disinfecting and cleaning gear, and the staff in field won't be a part of that anymore.
So, sounds amazing for returning staff. Drop your gear and go, and no unpacking or cleaning vehicles. Where do I sign up?
Yeah, but it's as the same as David. It kills my budgets.
Can I ask, since we're talking about staffing a little bit and programming, maybe specifically to programs that are back, like Andrew's, how have staff adapted to all the new procedures and protocols, and how are they managing that aspect? Andrew, given you've run a few programs so far.
We've sort of always gone down the road of, as much as possible, we've got full-time staff, so that was really good in terms of JobKeeper eligibility, and we've got a lot of long-term staff. So, I mean, to be honest, after 2 or 3 months of JobKeeper style tasks, which is really good in terms of getting around to all those things you never get time to do, they were really very enthusiastic about getting back and doing, like, probably the best comment I had was from someone who's finished their internship and is now in her first year as a staff member with us. And I just sort of said to her, how's it going? And she said, look, getting back in front of a group, it was just so emotional. And it kind of, like, if I had any doubt as to why I'm doing what I'm doing, I had no doubt after yesterday. So, we've done a fair bit of training. A lot of training, actually. So probably the week before we took groups back, it was all given over to, trying to explain the rationale for why we were doing things, trying to explain why the industry plan was set up the way it was, just so they've got that context. So, look, the biggest issue is still trying to keep, particularly with primary school age children, any form of kind of social isolation. So, we can set things up in the dining room, and we can, do everything by the book in the activity space, but you still have to basically constantly remind them to keep separate. And there are, again, it differs from different schools, but there'll be some schools that look, they're all over each other at school anyway. So, but yeah, I think the staff have done really well, being flexible and kind of, getting back into the swing of things. Probably a little bit rusty at first, but now, 4 or 5 weeks in, just getting into a rhythm of, what's different. But yeah, our staff are carrying, they walk around with a big bucket, which is full of everything they need for disinfecting and all that sort of thing. So, yeah.
So instead of a backpack,
souvenir one day.
Instead of a backpack, they carry buckets now.
Luke, did you have something to say?
Yeah, just going back to the staff, I think one of the big things for us last week was with our first program, we had 2 staff who became ill, and having to essentially take them out of circulation for 48 hours while they waited for a COVID test was was an important sort of learning point that all of a sudden it's not just having your team go down before, it's the staff member calling up and saying, I'm ill, and having to send them off to go get a COVID test and essentially wait for that to come back. And if it's a 48-hour turnaround time, it kind of limits those sorts of things. So just wanted to say that, yeah, we lost 2 staff last week, and it's impacted immensely, even though we're running in teams like someone else has mentioned. Unfortunately, all best laid plans went out the window, and we were struggling a bit to make sure that we could keep staff separate on their teams, but something for everyone to be aware of with casual staff.
Where are you based, Luke?
We're down in South Australia, so we're a mobile provider of hardtop residential programs. So yeah, essentially in our COVID safe plans, we're good to go. And we had 70, oh no, sorry, it was last week, it was 50 year 3s out on camp. Social distancing was not a was not a big thing for the kids' point of view, but essentially we did our best, and the teachers seemed pretty happy with the protocols put in place. So it was a good one to blow the cobwebs out.
Thanks very much for that, Luke. That was very informative. Do other people who have potentially been running programs want to say anything? And has, I guess, in terms of risk management, has it changed lots of what you would do within the context of risk management plans? And have we all written and rewritten risk management plans?
So one of the things we've done is we've just made I suppose an appendix document with a risk register. So instead of going back and essentially trying to put COVID in absolutely everywhere, we've gone back and assessed where it needs to be changed for COVID reasons, but also made that appendix document the most important document when it comes to COVID. So.
I don't think it's, you know, always the process of rewriting things always takes time, but I don't think it's been massively different. And if anything, it's probably just reiterated to us some good practice, you know, some cleaning and hygiene after sort of sharing helmets and all those sort of things is probably never a bad thing. But, you know, the pressure comes in terms of risk management is making sure you don't sort of slip up in terms of equipment and those sort of things that it's not it'll be okay, just have a lend of the paddles. It's actually going back and making sure you clean everything, and PFDs and tents and that sort of stuff is probably the adherence component. And I guess I'm working with young adults, and getting them to take it seriously is probably the hardest part of implementing some of the risk management. They're all sort of pretty bulletproof, and as you know, it just is probably a little bit more problematic to get them to say, you know, this is realistically, we do need to follow these guidelines and we do need to adhere to them. And they're making their own decisions about their own choices of their health. Is, you know, they're at the nightclubs and they're doing other things, and then suddenly they're having to be socially distant on a trip. Can sometimes create an interesting conversation.
I think one of the biggest keys there in getting people or the kids to take it seriously is really good role modeling. And that's just making sure we're doing everything that we can do, and just showing them that we take it seriously as well. And I know that's easier said than done, and it's not always fun, but I definitely think it would make a difference with how the kids take it, or adults.
Yeah, definitely. And I think too, it's the staff, like casual staff training, of, you know, when casual staff start to go back to work here in Victoria, they're going to be going from school to school or organization to organization with different processes, and it'll be trying to keep on track of their actual practice. It's all, I think, you know, as was said before, it's all well and good to have it written down. It's just, is it actually happening? I didn't mind rewriting and writing and rewriting. because it was such an evolving landscape. And, you know, with new information comes new processes and greater clarity. And I think, you know, that's great. You know, and I think back in March where they're like, oh, no, it's just flu symptoms. And all of a sudden now a new symptom is if you loss of smell. And it's just like, that's the same with our processes. You know, what works, what isn't working. It's okay to rewrite things. I mean, I also very much took the stance that I've got robust gastro outbreak risk management processes anyway. I didn't have to modify too much for COVID just because I already had these kind of lockdown isolate procedures down for a big gastro outbreak. So it was just modifying that a little bit. But yeah, it's apart from the fact that you got to look at the same thing over and over again, it's actually kind of fun, I think.
Dave, you raise an interesting point, and it's probably a little bit aside to what you're sort of mentioning, but the idea of staff moving from different places, it puts us in a similar realm to the instance of staff moving from the nursing homes to nursing homes. Lots of sort of casual staff moving from nursing home to nursing home, and that's going to create a dilemma for, especially sort of somewhere like Victoria, where sessionally people work across maybe 5 or 6 different employers. And they book them up pretty quickly, and if they've been out of work for a while, that's going to be something to monitor, I imagine, or I'm not sure. Like, it just sort of occurred to me then as a thinking process, how employers will view that if I'm an accessional person and say, oh, well, I worked for Brighton last week, but I've also worked for such and such and such, and especially if I'm doing lots of one-day programs, the implications for potentially staff will be that maybe they don't get the work because of the number of employers they might be working across.
Yeah, you're right, Brendan. And it's one thing that I've actually had, the most recent thing I've written through is a staff onboarding process. And with questions like, who have you worked for in the last 2 weeks?
Yeah.
And, you know, what's their record like? And, you know, it's really interesting to think that we might be in a situation where we have to say no to people because of who they've worked for or how many people they've worked for in recent weeks. And I feel really bad for casuals if that's the case, you know, but kind of like having someone call up and say, I'm sick 2 days before. When you're casually, what's the obligation to pay them as well, right? Like, they might turn around and say, not tell us that they're feeling ill because they want the cash or need the work rather than being open and honest with us. And that's a real risk. It's probably my biggest risk at the moment is just thinking about my casual staffing.
Yeah. No, I think I don't think it's. I imagine it's across a lot of different organisations, but you know, the casual cleaners, the casual lots of different things. It probably has implications across a wide raft of industry or professions, but it may well have a fairly limiting effect on sessionals.
Yeah, well, I mean, I wondered too about this, and I've started chatting to a lot of the other independent schools within my southeast suburb kind of region. And we've actually started sharing that info about who's working with who and when. And, you know, that's one of those things. I mean, obviously we ask the casual who they've worked with and we trust them to tell us. But the other way that as an organization is we can track that staff fatigue as well. And who they've been in contact with. I think that'll become important. So it's probably increased our communication between the different organizations where normally we would be a little bit secretive as to what we were doing and where we were going. But yeah, it's a good thing, I think.
Dave, do you think there's a need in Victoria or nationally for a register or a pool of casual freelancers to better coordinate this given our new situation in the pandemic era?
Oh, that's one for an opinion, I guess, rather than an educated guess. I don't know, because I think there's a lot of movement in staffing at the moment around what quals you need and how do we assess that, you know, especially independent schools. Do we use VIT teachers or do we, you know, and we're making our own rules up at this stage. I like the Knowlers concept. And I worked in WA 15 years ago when Knowlers was the beginnings of it. I like that concept. I don't like the way that it was put out. So, you know, I'm really happy to see someone apply for me and say that they've got NOLA's registration, so I can know that things have been ticked off. But man, to try and admin that is difficult.
Yeah, but we do get, within our discussion here on a Monday, we do get lots of industry heavy hitters who come in and listen in and contribute to the discussion, and maybe it's time to revisit a freelancing pool or a management system where we can all be connected better. And, you know, if you have outbreaks in certain clusters of freelancers and you go to another group where there isn't an outbreak, so programming can have long-term stability. I don't know. It's just something I'm floating out there amongst the audience. Does anyone else have any other opinions on that?
I think
it's Mark here from Corf.
Oh.
I often wondered whether an Airbnb style of register would work, where as a freelancer you create your own profile and you are then able to comment on your employer and vice versa, and neither gets published until they're both done it in a similar way that Airbnb works, as a way of trying to keep people honest. It doesn't solve the tick-off problem, Dave, that you're talking about, but at least it means there's some sort of potentially a central database of possible staff. And if you're looking for work, then it would be up to you to keep your quals up to date and what's listed up to date, because if employers keep going back to that list, then they're more likely to employ you if they see you've got your first aid updated last year and blah blah blah, and lots of good comments. So,
Andrew, do you have a comment?
Yeah, just on the COVID stuff, I think it really comes down to, as well, people being aware of what's going on in the schools around them, and if they have been working for schools that are in or client groups that have come from areas that are issues, that they're just getting tested themselves to actually do that stuff. But you need to be, I suppose, proactive with that. So, knowing that you've got a program coming up in a couple of weeks and being able to sort of have a potential regime in place for yourself, so you can actually show to your employer that you do, that you are getting tested, or that you haven't been in contact with someone with COVID. I mean, we've got, most places, I think, have got the declaration. So we've got a form that people are supposed to fill out just on their phone when they turn up at the centre. You click, no, I haven't been in contact with anyone, I haven't been overseas, blah, blah, blah. And then they submit that, and it goes straight to the client, who's notionally sitting in the office across from the car park where they are, and they can actually get that document straight away. So you've got that process there for making sure that people are at least being triggered to remember that, hey, I can't be sick when I go to program, or I can't be in contact with people that have had COVID. So we're probably only just starting to see work come back through our pool at the moment. So that's slowly starting to build up right now. So we'll see what happens. I mean, some of the stuff that Mark was saying too, I mean, from Coefficient's perspective, we've got those processes in place. So people, when someone gets put on a program, a client can see all of their qualifications and what they've got. There's a few things that we're trying to sort of improve heading forward, and some of the stuff like being able to get comments and I suppose a bit of an idea attached to that person from the client. We've sort of got that in place at the moment, but it's not really easy to find, so no one's really using that stuff. But I think having some sort of qualitative way of looking at things rather than a quantitative sort of, have they got these skills, feels a bit more, I suppose, attuned to making sure that we are getting the right person for the job. So that's my perspective anyway.
And Greta, have you found that most of I know obviously there's probably not a whole lot of work going around, but for those clients that have reached out, how are you finding them in terms of the way in which they're interacting with bringing on casual staff from Coefficient in the climate of COVID, and have they changed the way in which they interact with you or the types of questions they're asking?
No, look, not really. Everyone's got their own sort of, everyone's been sort of working fairly heavily towards getting a lot of their COVID stuff in place. So a lot of the time it's just making sure that, staff get there early enough to actually do the bits and pieces that they need them to do. That's probably the key one. One of the ones that I'm sort of potentially going to find a bit annoying is there's those couple of different training, online training programs. So I think there was the federal government one, which was more about aged care and health workers. And then there's the Queensland one, which is sort of tailored more for the outdoor rec, sport sector. So some people are looking at using the sport and rec one, and some are using the federal government one. And so that's a bit. I would think as a staff member it would be kind of frustrating if I'm saying to you, hey, you just need to do this outdoor rec based one, and then you go somewhere else and they go, oh no, you've got to do this one. That's kind of a bit. I think would be a bit frustrating, particularly when it's the generic sort of training and not a site-specific training when you're trying to roll that sort of stuff on top, which is probably the most important thing. So, that's I think the only sort of real things at the moment. But while we've got everything in place, I think everyone up here is still relatively sort of loose with stuff at the moment, because we're not really sort of seeing there's the opportunity for an outbreak is sort of lesser and has been sort of rolling back at the moment. So everyone's a bit more easy with it, but I think everyone's got the stuff in place that if we wanted to ramp it up quite tightly and suddenly, I think everyone could quite easily. So, yeah.
Thanks for that. Just wanted to ask, Cherie, do you want to make a comment on what you said, which is quite an interesting comment in the group chat? And then we'll have quote of the week and video of the week and wrap up what has been a great conversation. Thanks for everyone who came into the Outhouse today and for your amazing input. Thanks very much.
So this was from Jocelyn, actually, on Facebook. She got kicked out of the group and made a comment on a Facebook that the group that she was taking was a closed group, and they are in campus engagement program with only 2 staff. So her staff were the only extra additional to the group. She said it did concern her a little bit over here in Western Australia that people are going about their lives as normal, apart from hand sanitizer and businesses, and life feels pretty normal. Even when she explained to the teacher who worked with her that there was a possibility if it were possible to maintain the 1.5, even that teacher was like telling her, oh, you're going to get a hug from me, and which clearly breaks the 1.5. So she's just kind of worried that if COVID does get over in Western Australia, whether some people will take it seriously, which is, I guess, what we're seeing all over Australia, is whether people are taking it serious or not.
Yeah, perhaps a conversation for another Outhouse sometime. The quote of the week this week comes from a very good article that I've only read this morning in Joey, but it's a range of university-based academics from all around the globe commenting on the future of outdoor environmental education in a now COVID world. very interesting read, and I'll post the whole article in the chat. But the quote of the week is from Mark Cosgrove. One thing that has struck me over the past 2 months in my own neighborhood is the sense of well-being, sustenance, and enjoyment that I and others have drawn from simply being able to be out and about, in place or placed, and sometimes making a contribution to local communities and environs. And in my own personal experience, I have seen that has gone on much more. And perhaps my own personal contribution is this project. Thanks very much for joining, and I'll post the full article in the chat. Have a great week and hope to see you inside the Outhaus next Monday at 16:17, when we will be talking about
women in the outdoors. So next week's session, we'll be talking about some of the struggles that women face, which I think will be a great session for women and men. And hopefully all of you will join us.